December 27, 1994, just outside St. Louis. At 10:45 a.m., a brown Chevrolet pulls into the lot. 4 men step out. Their ski masks are pulled tight, pistols already drawn. They cross the sidewalk quickly and push through the glass doors of the bank. On the ground. Now, the order is immediate. Customers drop to the floor. Tellers raise their hands, frozen behind the counter. One of the men jumps over the counter, forces open the cash drawers, and sweeps bundles of bills into a bag. Another stands in the center of the lobby, weapon aimed, keeping everyone pinned in place. The 2 others secure the entrances, making sure no one moves. The entire building is under their control in less than a minute. Before leaving, one of them sets a device on the counter, a pipe bomb, taped and wired. The warning is simple: stay down, or it will explode. Seconds later, they're gone. Out the door, into the waiting car, disappearing before anyone can lift their head. This wasn't a random robbery. It was one move in a campaign that swept across the Midwest. More than 20 banks in 7 different states, each one hit with speed. Each one ending the same way, with a bomb left behind. But the strange part is, the money was never the only goal. Something else was driving these men. So, how did they pull off all these heists without being caught? And what was the real purpose behind this campaign, if it wasn't just about cash? To find out, we need to go back.
Across the Midwest, a band of armed robbers struck banks at the rate of nearly 1 per month. They attacked with lightning precision and lethal force. They were in and out in 5 minutes.
January 25, 1994, Ames, Iowa. It was a Tuesday morning in a quiet college town. The kind of place where most crime reports were for shoplifting or traffic violations. At 10:30 a.m., the lobby of the local bank was calm. A handful of customers were finishing transactions, and a few tellers were at their stations, when 2 men entered wearing ski masks pulled tight across their faces and heavy coats to hide their bodies. Each carried a semi-automatic pistol. The first man raised his weapon immediately, sweeping it across the room. The second vaulted over the counter without hesitation, landing beside the stunned tellers. Both men shouted for everyone to get on the ground. Customers dropped where they stood. Some lay flat, others crouched with their heads down. The tellers froze at their stations, hands still on the drawers. The masked man behind the counter barked orders. Drawer after drawer was ripped open, stacks of cash grabbed in bundles and shoved into a bag. The movements were quick, practiced, and left no time for resistance. One teller managed to press the silent alarm under her counter without being noticed. The signal went out to the local police and to the FBI office, but the nearest agents were more than 30 miles away. For the people inside, that distance made no difference. Their safety depended on surviving the next few minutes. The robbers worked fast. Within moments, the drawers were empty. The man in the lobby kept his gun aimed on the customers, repeating the same commands. Down. Don't look up. Stay still. The atmosphere was tense but controlled. There were no speeches, no wasted words. Before leaving, one of the men pulled a bomb from his coat. It was wrapped in tape, with wires visible on the outside. He placed it on the counter and warned that if anyone moved, it would explode within 5 minutes. The hostages froze again. Then the men were gone. They exited through the doors they had come in, stepped into a waiting vehicle, and drove off before the police could arrive. Inside, silence filled the lobby. Everyone remained on the floor, unsure if the device was real. When the first officers arrived, they evacuated the building and waited for the bomb squad. The technicians moved carefully, treating the package as if it could detonate at any moment. They examined it, dismantled it, and discovered the truth. It wasn't a bomb at all. Just 2 road flares bound together with duct tape. The threat was fake, but it had achieved its purpose. It had frozen the room, delayed pursuit, and created confusion. The robbers had bought themselves the time they needed to escape. In less than 5 minutes, they had taken thousands of dollars in cash. They left behind no fingerprints, no clear images from the cameras, and no usable descriptions from the witnesses. The only evidence was the imitation bomb. The Ames robbery was not an isolated event. It was the first move in a calculated series of attacks that would spread quickly across the Midwest. Within weeks, the same tactics reappeared. On February 15, 1994, masked men stormed a bank in Davenport, Iowa. The entry was almost identical. Ski masks, pistols drawn, shouts ordering everyone to the ground. One of them leaped the counter, sweeping cash from the drawers with speed. But unlike Ames, the device they left behind was no longer fake. This time, it was a functioning pipe bomb. It was incomplete, missing a detonator, but no one inside could know that. Again, the building was evacuated, and bomb technicians had to dismantle it piece by piece. By the time the scene was declared safe, the robbers were gone. The progression was clear. What began in Ames as a test with a decoy device had escalated into the use of a real explosive. In the months that followed, robberies appeared in rapid succession across state lines. March brought another job in Cincinnati. Weeks later, Green Bay. Then Kansas City. Then St. Louis. Each followed the same structure. Mid-morning, when banks were open but not yet crowded. Fast entry, immediate control of the lobby, counter vaults to reach the cash drawers, weapons brandished to silence resistance. The devices remained a constant. Some were fake, others were real but incomplete. Either way, they froze the scene. Employees and customers stayed down long after the robbers had fled. Responding units had to treat every package as live, devoting manpower to bomb disposal while the crew escaped across state lines. Witness descriptions were consistent but limited. Every time, the robbers wore ski masks and gloves. No one ever saw a clear face. No one could describe distinguishing features. Occasionally, customers or employees heard them shout in Spanish to each other, but the commands were short, nothing more than a few words. They were in and out in under 5 minutes. By the summer of 1994, the Midwestern Bank Bandits had struck again and again without leaving anything investigators could use to identify them. Their disguises, gloves, and speed denied police the usual leads. Witnesses could offer little more than descriptions of masks, coats, and pistols. Surveillance footage showed only obscured faces and rushed movements. For the FBI, the case was becoming a cycle of repeated failures. That cycle broke in June. On June 8th, the gang robbed a bank in Springdale, Ohio. Their routine was unchanged. 2 men entered wearing masks, pistols raised, ordering everyone down. One leaped the counter, sweeping cash into a bag while the other held the lobby under control. A device was left behind, as always, to delay pursuit. Within minutes, they were gone, carrying more than $11,000 in cash. But outside, something different happened. Several bystanders caught a glimpse of their getaway vehicle, a brown Chevrolet. Unlike the robbers, the car could not hide behind a mask. 9 days later, a security guard at an industrial lot noticed the same car parked and abandoned. It had been sitting for a week, attracting suspicion. He called the local police. When officers arrived, they saw a police scanner on the seat, a pager, and a $20 bill stained with dye, evidence of stolen bank money. In the glove compartment, they found something more alarming, a hand grenade. Like the other devices, it was inert, but it connected the car to the robberies beyond doubt. For the first time, investigators had a physical link. The car was traced through its serial number back to the dealership, where it had been sold only weeks earlier. But the lead quickly stalled. The salesman remembered the transaction but could not provide a description of the buyer. No paperwork tied it directly to a name. Still, the discovery marked progress. For the first time, the robbers had left behind something investigators could build from. Meanwhile, the robberies continued. By the end of the year, The crew struck again near St. Louis. This time, 4 gunmen stormed the bank. With a larger team, their control of the lobby was immediate. Customers and employees were forced down within seconds. Witnesses outside saw them put on their ski masks just before entering, and a teller inside caught a fleeting glimpse of a man's face under the mask. Composite sketches were drawn from these accounts and circulated. The FBI hoped someone would recognize them. At the same time, the gang seemed determined to taunt the people chasing them. In one of their getaway cars, investigators found a newspaper clipping about Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. Letters and cartoons mocking the FBI appeared in the mail. The message was clear. The bandits wanted attention, and they wanted the Bureau to know they were being ridiculed. Still, the real break did not come from a car or a sketch. It came from a forgotten tip. By mid-1995, the scope of the robberies had forced the FBI to consolidate efforts. Offices from 7 states, along with agents from Washington, D.C., gathered in Louisville, Kentucky, to coordinate the investigation. Every case file, every lead, every overlooked report was reviewed again. The idea was simple: nothing would be left unchecked. It was during this process that a tip from Cincinnati, logged the year before, resurfaced. A caller had named 2 men as suspects, Peter Langan and Richard Guthrie. Both had criminal backgrounds. Both had been arrested in Georgia years earlier for an armed robbery at a pizza shop. At the time, police recovered semi-automatic weapons and grenades, the same type of weapons now linked to the bandits. Guthrie had served time in prison. Langan had attracted the attention of the Secret Service for making threats against the president. The lead had gone cold, buried under the flood of reports, but now it was reviewed with new urgency. Agents pulled the mugshots of Langan and Guthrie and compared them to the composite sketches drawn after the St. Louis robbery. The resemblance was undeniable. The sketches could have been traced directly from their booking photos. For investigators who had been chasing masked men across state lines for nearly 2 years, it was the first time the bandits had real names. The realization changed the entire trajectory of the case. These were not ordinary criminals robbing banks for personal profit. Langan and Guthrie were tied to white supremacist groups. They had a history of paramilitary training, weapons stockpiles, and anti-government ideology. The robberies were not just funding a lifestyle. They were financing a cause. By late 1995, the FBI knew who they were chasing. They had sketches, mugshots, and a growing understanding of the ideology behind the crimes. But knowing their names was only the first step. The real challenge would be finding them. Langan and Guthrie had built their operation around mobility, discipline, and secrecy. They surfaced only to strike. Then they vanished again, leaving behind nothing but fear and unanswered questions. The robberies were continuing. The bandits had carried out at least 15 jobs across the Midwest, their total take now hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each time, they proved they could move at will, from Iowa to Missouri to Ohio, without being caught. By early 1996, the FBI finally had names. Peter Langan and Richard Guthrie were identified as leaders of the Midwestern Bank Bandits, but having names wasn't enough. The crew remained underground, surfacing only to strike. To bring them down, the Bureau needed someone who could walk into their world. That someone was a former associate. He had met Langan years earlier at a white supremacist rally. They shared the same circles, the same rhetoric, and for a brief time, the same ambitions. Through Langan, he was introduced to Richard Guthrie. Both men were outspoken, convinced they were building something bigger than themselves. The associate drifted away before the robberies began, choosing to build a new life with a wife and child. But he still carried memories of those days, enough to make him useful when investigators came looking. Agents tracked him down in Georgia. At first, he was reluctant. He didn't want to be pulled back into the orbit of men he had deliberately left behind. But the FBI made it clear he had been close enough to the crew that prosecutors could charge him as a co-conspirator. Cooperating was his way out. He agreed. Still, agents had doubts. They needed to be sure he was telling the truth. They brought him into an office in Cincinnati for a polygraph. The results suggested deception. Some believed he was feeding them lies to protect himself. For hours, the question lingered: trust him or cut him loose? The answer came unexpectedly. While sitting in the office, the informant placed a call to a mutual friend he had dined with days earlier. On speakerphone, without being prompted, the friend casually asked about his meeting with Guthrie. That was enough. Whatever the polygraph said, the connection was real. The FBI decided to use him. The instructions were simple: reconnect with Guthrie, build trust, and when he surfaced, alert the Bureau. The informant carried a pager linked directly to agents, ready to send a signal the moment he made contact. It didn't take long. In mid-January 1996, Guthrie appeared at a meeting in Cincinnati. The informant sat with him in a parking lot, engaging in small talk to mask his nerves. Guthrie was armed. He had an assault rifle in the vehicle, along with a bag of armor-piercing ammunition. He was confident, almost casual, speaking about the group's activities and hinting at future plans. The informant kept him talking long enough to provide agents with a description of the van and a partial plate number. Then he paged the FBI. Surveillance teams picked up the trail. On January 17th, they located Guthrie driving through the city. They followed cautiously, radios open, updating every move. Guthrie noticed. He accelerated, trying to shake the tail. The pursuit twisted through neighborhood streets until he turned down a closed route near the river. There was no exit. Guthrie abandoned the van and ran. An agent sprinted after him, closing the distance step by step. The moment was tense. Guthrie was known to carry multiple firearms. He had a pistol within reach, and the pursuing agent was certain he was about to turn and fire. Instead, Guthrie slowed. Surrounded at the riverbank, with agents closing from both sides, he stopped. He raised his hands and surrendered. The relief was immediate. No one had been shot, and Guthrie was alive to face interrogation. His van, left behind, was filled with weapons and supplies that tied directly to the robberies. Now came the question: would he talk? In custody, Guthrie began to reveal fragments. He explained how he and Langan stayed in contact through coded pager numbers and voicemail drops. He admitted they had an upcoming meeting scheduled. For the FBI, this was the break they needed. If they could catch Langan in the act, they could bring down the second leader. The target was Columbus, Ohio. On January 18th, surveillance teams surrounded a duplex identified by Guthrie. Outside sat Langan's van, confirmation that he was inside. The plan was to wait until he left the building and entered the vehicle. Once he was seated, FBI cars would box him in from every side. It would be fast and controlled, limiting the chance for a shootout. At 9:30 in the morning, Langan appeared. He carried a canvas bag, heavy, the outline suggesting it held a weapon. He walked to the van, opened the door, and climbed inside. Agents waited for the moment to strike, but Langan didn't start the engine. He sat still, motionless. The seconds dragged. Then the signal came: move in. Vehicles roared forward, blocking every path of escape. Agents shouted commands. Langan's response was immediate. He raised a pistol and fired through the glass. The gunfire set off a barrage. Dozens of rounds tore into the van. Windows shattered, doors crumpled, fragments of glass and metal filled the air. For a few moments, the scene was chaos. When the shooting stopped, the van was riddled with holes. Langan was still alive. Bleeding from cuts and shrapnel, he was dragged from the driver's seat and placed under arrest. Inside the duplex, agents uncovered the full scale of the operation. Semi-automatic rifles, pistols, grenades, thousands of rounds of ammunition, disguises from the robberies, ski masks, FBI and ATF hats, police uniforms were stacked alongside false identification documents. Boxes of propaganda, videotapes, and recruitment material outlined the ideology of the Aryan Republican Army. The safe house confirmed what investigators already suspected. These robberies were never just about money. They were about financing a white supremacist movement, inspired by earlier groups that had robbed banks to fund political violence. Within 2 days, both leaders of the Midwestern Bank Bandits were in custody. Guthrie through surrender, Langan after a violent standoff. The FBI had their proof: weapons, disguises, propaganda, and confessions tying them to the robberies. But the case wasn't finished. 2 more members of the crew were still free. And while Guthrie was beginning to talk, what he revealed suggested that the network was wider and more dangerous than a simple gang of bank robbers. The next clue came from information Guthrie had provided before his cooperation ended. He mentioned 2 names he knew only partially. One man called Scott, connected to music, and another called Kevin, who he believed had a relative in law enforcement. It was little to go on. No surnames, no addresses, just fragments. The FBI passed the details to their field offices. In Philadelphia, agents cross-checked the lead against intelligence already gathered by the local police. The city's intelligence division had been monitoring white supremacist activity for years, keeping track of rallies, license plates, and individuals who moved in and out of the movement. Among their files, the pieces began to fit. A name surfaced: Kevin McCarthy. He was young, involved in white power circles, and indeed related to a police lieutenant. Surveillance logs showed him attending Aryan Nations events. Cross-referencing those records with Guthrie's statement, the match was undeniable. From McCarthy, the second man became clear. He played in a band with a local studio manager, Scott Stedeford, who also had ties to the same extremist networks. Guthrie's vague memory of Scott, the one with music, suddenly had a face and a name. The FBI began surveillance. Agents tracked both men's movements, noting frequent visits to a recording studio where Stedeford worked. Cars parked outside were logged, plates run, and associates identified. Patterns emerged: meetings at the studio, visits to rural properties linked to sympathizers, and regular contact with known figures in the white supremacist scene. The challenge was taking them alive. The bandits' history of explosives and automatic weapons meant any raid risked a shootout in a crowded city block. The FBI decided on an undercover approach. 2 agents posed as a father and daughter. The daughter claimed she wanted to record a song as a gift for her mother and asked Stedeford for a quote on studio time. The plan was to make contact in a controlled environment, confirm he was unarmed, and move in quietly. It worked. Inside the studio, Stedeford was alone. He listened to the request, offered pricing, and began to walk through the details. The agents gave the signal. Within seconds, he was under arrest. No weapons were drawn, no shots fired. The FBI had secured one of the final pieces of the crew without violence. The next target was Kevin McCarthy. His arrest required a different approach. Agents worried he might run once news of Stedeford's capture spread. They enlisted his uncle, the Philadelphia police lieutenant, to help. The man entered his nephew's home early in the morning, disarmed him, and turned him over to the waiting federal team. McCarthy surrendered without resistance. With McCarthy and Stedeford in custody, the operational side of the Midwestern Bank Bandits was effectively over. The FBI now had 4 men: Guthrie, Langan, Stedeford, and McCarthy. Together, they had carried out more than 20 robberies across 7 states. But inside the bureau, relief was short-lived. Days after pleading guilty to 19 robberies, Richard Guthrie was found dead in his cell. He had hanged himself with a bedsheet. For prosecutors, the impact was immediate. Guthrie had been the most cooperative of the group, supplying 99 pages of confessions and mapping out the timeline of the robberies. With him gone, his statements could not be used directly in court against the others. Cross-examination was no longer possible. The strongest pillar of the government's case had collapsed overnight. Investigators scrambled for alternatives. McCarthy agreed to cooperate, confirming his role and identifying Stedeford in multiple robberies. But his testimony alone was not enough. To strengthen the case, prosecutors needed someone who could corroborate not just the crimes, but the ideology behind them, the belief system that had tied the robberies together and explained their purpose. Thus, the investigation had to find new ground. Attention turned to Mark Thomas, a Pennsylvania white supremacist who had long been on the radar of local police intelligence. He was older than the others, already established in the movement, and ran a farm where younger recruits came and went. Thomas wasn't one of the masked gunmen inside the banks, but he had provided shelter, direction, and ideology. McCarthy had told investigators that Thomas was the one who convinced him and Stedeford to join the Aryan Republican Army. He had driven them to meetings, hosted them at his home, and introduced them to Langan and Guthrie. For months, FBI agents kept pressure on him. They visited his farm repeatedly, making it clear that he was a target. They tracked his contacts and recorded his statements. Thomas denied involvement, but investigators collected evidence of his role as a facilitator. McCarthy strengthened that link, telling agents how Thomas had taken a cut of stolen money to build what he called a war chest for the Aryan cause. In early 1997, prosecutors made their move. Thomas was charged with conspiring to commit bank robbery. The case was thin, built largely on testimony from younger men who had every incentive to reduce their own sentences. But prosecutors believed that confronting Thomas directly could force him to break. He was arrested at his farm. True to form, Thomas alerted the media and told reporters he had been targeted because of his beliefs. Cameras rolled as he was taken into custody, and he insisted that the FBI wanted him silenced. In court, he pleaded not guilty and claimed the government was trying to criminalize ideology. But one night in jail was enough. The following day, Thomas asked to meet with investigators. He signed a 7-page plea agreement, admitting to his role in supporting the robberies and corroborating McCarthy's account. The man who had postured as a hardened leader of the movement gave up almost immediately when faced with the reality of a prison cell. His cooperation secured the prosecution's case. With Thomas confirming the conspiracy, the government had what it needed: testimony tying the ideology of the Aryan Republican Army to the money stolen in the robberies. The trials moved forward. Peter Langan, identified as the operational leader, faced charges of bank robbery, weapons violations, and conspiracy. He refused to cooperate, claiming ideological motivations, but the evidence was overwhelming. The arsenal from his Columbus safe house, rifles, grenades, disguises, and propaganda, left no doubt about his role. He was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. Scott Stedeford stood trial next. Identified as one of the gunmen, he was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to nearly 30 years in prison. Kevin McCarthy, the youngest member, chose to cooperate. He admitted his role in 2 robberies and testified against his associates. His cooperation earned him a lighter sentence of 5 years, far less than the decades he might have faced. Mark Thomas, the mentor and recruiter, was sentenced to 9 years for his role in the conspiracy. The case closed the chapter on one of the most active bank robbery crews of the 1990s. Over the course of 2 years, the Midwestern Bank Bandits carried out more than 20 robberies across 7 states. They stole hundreds of thousands of dollars, used fake and real explosives to terrorize victims, and mocked the FBI while they were at large. But what had begun as a campaign of speed and discipline ended with arrests, guilty pleas, and long prison sentences. In the end, the so-called Aryan Republican Army never achieved its vision. Their attempt to build a revolutionary force collapsed under pressure, betrayal, and the realities of federal prosecution. By 1997, the campaign was officially over. The Midwest returned to quiet, and the men who had moved with precision and speed from bank to bank were locked away, their plans exposed, and their movement dismantled.